Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking with Mark Cohen, founder and CEO of Legal Mosaic, about what law schools should be teaching, but aren't. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Allison Monahan, and normally I'm with Lee Burgess, my co-host. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Career Conference. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on iTunes or your favorite app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today, we're talking with Mark Cohen, founder and CEO of Legal Mosaic, about what law schools should be teaching and aren't, and also a bit about the future and past of the legal profession. So welcome, Mark.
Pleasure to be here, Allison.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Before we jump into today's topic, can you just give us a little bit of background on your career path and how you've ended up doing what you do?
Sure. So back around the time that electricity first came into vogue, I became a young lawyer. I was an assistant U.S. attorney in the civil division, and I tried 20 major cases while I was a baby lawyer, grew up fairly quickly. I then became a partner, yes, you heard it right, partner at a what was then the second largest firm in the country, firm called Finley Cumble. I spent 3 years as a partner there, and I then decided to leave big law to start my own boutique litigation firm that grew fairly quickly. We had 3 offices and about 30 lawyers working with me. And we represented mostly Fortune 500 companies in bet the company cases. And I also represented 5 foreign sovereign governments, which was kind of interesting. And while I was in private practice, I was also a federally appointed receiver. So I ran an international aviation parts company that was highly successful. And you might ask, why were you a receiver then? And the answer is because the owner did not share his success with the IRS and owed about $100 million. And that was my job to seek to repatriate it.
Wow, that makes me feel a lot better about not having paid my taxes yet.
There you go. And not only that, but also, much of our work was right where you are now located in Mexico City. Anyway, fast forward, I reached a point in my legal career where I decided that I really was not particularly interested in being a service provider and represent clients anymore. I wanted to take a step back. So I spent about a year or two setting up a charitable foundation. And after getting a bit bored with all the lunches that I had, much as I enjoyed them, not having had them for about 25 years, I got back into the legal arena and started off by, it's about the time that Tom Friedman wrote his book, The World is Flat. Mm-hmm. And I was quite intrigued by it. I had had some business dealings with one of the darlings of the book, an Indian company called Emphasis. And I started to get into legal process outsourcing. And after doing that for about 4 or 5 years, I got the idea with a friend of mine to go up the legal supply chain. And so I've co-founded a company called ClearSpire, which got a tremendous amount of international attention. And I think today still is quite widely talked about and used as a model of what legal delivery could be. We were very successful in some ways, but not as successful commercially as many had predicted. But it was what I call my $2 million tutorial. After selling the company and having that experience, I decided that I would sort of take a pause start to write a fair amount. I had been teaching at Georgetown Law, but only courses that I thought were contemporarily relevant. I'm sure we'll get into that in greater detail momentarily. So I'd done quite a bit of writing. I'd written for Bloomberg, and now I write a weekly column for Forbes on the sort of state of play in the global legal market. And Legal Mosaic was a repository for speaking, writing, etc. And I also do some selective legal consulting work, working principally with new legal providers, some established legal providers, and corporate legal departments, a couple of law firms, not many, in terms of how do they better structure and deliver legal services. So a bit more of a background perhaps than you had bargained for, Allison, but nonetheless, at least, I think the listeners will be better able to sort of gauge, from whence I'm coming.
Right. I think it's interesting because it sounds like you've worked in a lot of different aspects of the legal industry, everything from being a partner in a law firm to working in the government to working in actually, I do want you to explain one thing you said because I know what you said. But when you talk about legal process outsourcing, give me a little bit more about what that's about. And that might actually lead into my next question, which is how do you think the legal market is changing and has changed and will change from what it was maybe even when you started your career?
Sure. Well, let's take the first question first. What is legal process outsourcing, commonly known by the acronym LPO? Legal process outsourcing is a form of disaggregation of legal services. That means that services that were once performed exclusively under the supervision of law firms, not just the supervision of law firms, but under the aegis of law firms, are now beginning to be delivered by non-law firm legal service providers.
So what would that look like, practically speaking?
So
like, what do they do?
Sure. So a couple of examples would be document review. Used to be that phalanxes of $300 to $400 an hour associates would review documents, do privilege logs, things like that. And within the last 10 years, it's become now fairly commonplace, either for large corporations to do that work themselves with what amounts to captive legal process outsourcing units within their legal departments, or alternatively, a number of LPOs have grown and become fairly sizable as standalone companies that operate outside of law firms, but because they do not, quote, engage in the practice of law, close quote, they must be supervised either by law firms or corporate legal departments.
Okay, so these are essentially, are these all people or is some of this done with technology now? What's going on?
They are very, very now. Initially, Allison, I'm glad you framed the question that way. So initially, LPO was a straight labor arbitrage kind of a play.
Right, like outsource it to India because we have people who speak English and they're cheaper.
Precisely. But as time has gone on and as the volume of documents has exploded, as a result of digitalization, what was once a pure labor arbitrage play has now kind of morphed into a combination labor arbitrage and utilization of technology play. With respect to the utilization of technology, obviously there are a myriad of ways the technology is now embedded in legal delivery. But with respect to the example that I had cited earlier in terms of document review, determining which documents are relevant and which are not, technology is increasingly being utilized to make that initial determination and screening process. And likewise, it's being harnessed in various ways to streamline and make more efficient document review, as well as every manner of e-discovery, etc. So it's really cutting across a wide swath of functions.
Yeah, I remember my first legal job. I was working as a summer associate after my first year of law school, and I'd been a programmer before law school. So yeah, I'd done a few days of orientation, and then on a Friday afternoon, this guy comes in and drops a couple of boxes of documents, paper documents on my desk, hands me a highlighter and says, we need you to go through looking for this certain words and make a spreadsheet. And, I think it's going to take probably, do you think we should start now? Maybe over the weekend? Oh, I don't know, maybe Monday. And I just remember looking at him like, have you ever considered that you should just OCR these and then we can have a computer find the answer? And he's
right.
like, you obviously don't understand our business model. Right. But there's just this moment of like, are you serious? You actually want me to do this?
Yeah. And Allison, your example is really, sort of a really poster child for how it is and why it is that clients increasingly, as opposed to traditional legal source providers, read large law firms, have been the ones to drive most of the change in terms of legal delivery. In most industries that are undergoing change, the change is usually provided by the providers themselves, right?
Right. They have a desire to become more efficient, but that's not exactly the case here, right?
But that's sort of turned upside down in the legal industry. But that obviously is changing.
Sure. I mean, I don't think that exact scenario would happen now.
But it was very prevalent, I would say. Certainly when you started, it would be a very common story.
Well, it was also just very eye-opening for me because, coming from the background of like writing code, you're always looking at how can we take the person out of this? How can we make this more efficient? How can we eliminate some annoying task that no one wants to do? And then you realize, oh no, this entire business is basically built on people spending a lot of time on annoying tasks that no one wants to do.
And that really is a perfect segue to your next question in terms of, how have things changed, which obviously is a very broad topic, but just to continue on the thread that we've been going on in terms of your experience, I would just say that two things. One is that the urban myth that only law firms can perform quote unquote legal tasks has now pretty much been eradicated, right? So you have a number of paraprofessionals who are now able to perform things that used to be performed exclusively within the confines of a law firm. So, for example, if you need to do market research, in connection with a particular case, or market research to support a damage theory, or for additional discovery outside of what might be produced to you by the opposing side, used to be that associates would do this, and they would do this by billing lots and lots of hours to these tasks, whereas today so many of these processes not only are being performed by others than lawyers, but also they're being able to be done by machines rather than individuals. I won't even get into AI quite yet, but I would just simply say that if you take as one example of that, the fact that when I was a baby lawyer, there used to be what you call 50-state surveys for insurance companies, right? And they would engage in 50 states, and each state had its own insurance commission and its own regulations, et cetera, et cetera. And, that was a open season for lots of lawyers to bill lots of hours to update that, right? Today, of course, these kinds of things are now being marketed as products. Where they are much more cost effectively being delivered across the board to multiple customers, as opposed to sort of being leveraged across each client has the research done for them separately at tremendous cost. So I think what you're seeing is not only tasks being peeled away from lawyers, but also tasks now that used to be characterized as services being delivered as products. Those would be two, I think, large sort of threads to the conversation of how things have changed.
Right. I think that's very interesting. I mean, that's a thread you hear a lot. I mean, even in our business, like we have both services. We do one-on-one private tutoring, and then we also have products like our Start Law School Right course, which has a one-on-one component, but essentially it's a product that, we can reach a broader audience at a lower price point. So, I mean, do you think these are the things that the average lawyer is thinking about? And bookend that with, what are the law schools doing at this point?
All right. Well, let me first take your question of what is the average lawyer. If he or she is not thinking about it now, there's something terribly wrong. Because I will tell you that one of the things in my background I declined to mention, although I probably told you more than you or your listeners might care to know, but I was also the outside general counsel to 3 insurance companies while I was a practicing lawyer. And it was really interesting to sit down with the CEO of the company and actuary and to talk in terms of how we might be able, and this is 25 years ago, to use technology such as what actuaries routinely did in what they did to streamline legal services. And one of the things that I mentioned was 50 state surveys. Mm-hmm. And so actually almost a quarter of a century ago, I started to productize that former service. So fast forward, as I say one more time with feeling, lawyers certainly should be thinking along those lines, regardless of for whom they are working. And in terms of law schools, no, law schools are still, I think, skating to where the puck was, as opposed to skating to where the puck is going to be. And one example that I would cite is that if you talk to a wide number of law school deans, as I have and do regularly, as recently as a year ago, a lot of them still believe that law firms are, if not the only game in town, then the dominant game in town. In terms, particularly, I know you, as I recall, went to Columbia.
Right.
I'm sure that a lot of your colleagues, sort of routinely went into big law. That is really changing. I teach at Georgetown, and just to give you, and I think this is all public information, as recently as a few years ago when I started teaching there, probably almost 75% of their graduates went into big law. Mm-hmm. Now that number has dropped to about 50.
Wow, really?
I would not be surprised if in the next 2 or 3 years that number doesn't drop under 40.
Wow.
And that's at an elite law school. So I think that one of the things that law schools have got to do, and this starts, I think, with the deans and the faculty, is they've got to start getting a keener understanding of what's going on in the marketplace.
Right. Where are these people going? Like, what are they doing instead of getting these plush firm jobs?
First of all, these plush firm jobs just don't exist the way they used to, certainly for newly minted graduates, because increasingly clients are saying, we are not going to subsidize the on-the-job training of young lawyers anymore.
Right.
So it's not because the young lawyers, aren't just as capable as they once were. It's just rather that, once again, clients, are saying, we're going to drive this process now. It's not going to be the law firms. So
well, also, think about how many litigation, even when I started, how many litigation associates were fully employed doing document review.
Correct. Exactly.
That wasn't that long ago.
Exactly. And that's the impact of technology and disaggregation, as we talked about earlier. So I think to answer your question directly, I think a lot of people now are starting to consider what I would call careers that would once be thought to be ancillary to lawyers. So, for example, I had a number of my very good students at Georgetown working for the Big Four. And sometimes, as quote unquote lawyers, but more often, merging their legal background with other kinds of skill sets that they had. I think that a number of them are working for other types of legal service providers. Example, Axiom, United Lex are two that come to mind. A number of them are, working for various not-for-profits and firms that, sort of are more attuned to access to justice issues. And then a smattering of other things. A number of them, I think, have come to me and said, what about becoming an entrepreneur? So I think what you're beginning to see, Allison, is you're really beginning to see slowly that students, are sort of seeing what the marketplace reception is, seeing that it's changing, and even if the law schools are not necessarily preparing them for that change, they are having to, sort of make some twists and turns to find their way. I wish that law schools did a better job of preparing them for that process.
Right. Well, I asked you a sort of list of things you think the law schools are not doing so well. Why don't we go through that?
Sure.
So you can tell me, I'll run through the whole list and you can talk about it as you wish. So, I mean, a lot of these, it definitely seems like, you should graduate from law school having had some experience here, but I don't think that's true. So client interaction.
Yep. That's sort of the most basic lawyer skill, right? And yet I'm shocked when I, talk to associates at firms or people who've gone off from firms to do other things, how few of them have ever actually developed basic skills in terms of how do you interview a prospective client? Right. What do you do? What's the process? They don't know. It's something law schools should teach.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation yesterday, actually, for the podcast with Ashley Matthews, who works for Equal Justice Works. And I asked her, basically, what do you need to do to get a public interest job? She says, well, I mean, you need to be able to actually have experience with clients, like in the community that you want to serve. If you come in and tell me, like, I want to work with homeless veterans, and you've never worked with the homeless or with veterans, that doesn't really ring true. Like, you've got to show me this.
Yeah, last year I taught a course in Georgetown, one of the components of which was, client interviews. And to my knowledge, and this is nothing unique to Georgetown, this is the first time that it had been taught.
Yeah, well, definitely nobody taught me. I mean, I remember I was a patent attorney and, I'd have an expert witness and, the attorney says, my managing partner, whoever says to me, oh, can you go prepare him for his deposition? And there's this moment of like, okay, have I even been to a deposition? Like, do I have any idea what's going on here? And you want me to prep this guy for his interview? Like, how do I do that?
Right. By the way, Allison, if you contrast this, meaning legal education, with medical education, it's just a stunning contrast. Stunning contrast.
Oh, absolutely. No, I remember the first time they told me to go take a deposition. And I'm like, well, no one's ever taught me how to take a deposition. I can't just go take a deposition. And they're like, well, just email the firm. I think somebody has a book. So you've got like a 5-hour flight. You can literally, I'm not even making this up. You can read the book on the flight. And then when you land, if you have any questions, you can get back in touch and we'll help you out.
Yeah. There you go.
And you're like, okay, well, luckily I'm pretty good at talking to people. So I'll just kind of make it up as I go. But, I guess part of the thing is I don't think most professors in law schools have a whole lot of experience with this type of thing either.
I think that's an understatement.
So, who's going to be teaching it?
Yeah, in fact, that goes to a whole other point, which is clearly doctrinal law, which is what most law professors do, right?
Sure.
They teach torts, contracts, etc. I mean, obviously, that is a critical component of legal education and becoming a lawyer. You have to learn this stuff. But I would argue that you could learn this stuff just as effectively by other less expensive, less tedious means, and that the doctrinal part of the curriculum has to be balanced by, experiential learning and practical nuts and bolts training. And I think one of the problems is that historically, because, as you point out, so few law professors have ever had any kind of meaningful practice experience. In fact, a lot of them, I think, have positive disdain for people who have, soiled their hands in that arena. You've got a real disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So next on your list were basic drafting, either pleadings and or contracts. Which I think the schools are maybe a little bit better at this. I mean,
well,
maybe.
I would just tell you that I won't name the school, but there is a T20 law school that I know quite well. It's not Georgetown, where the shining star professor of contracts has admitted to me recently that in a 25-year career, she has never once drafted a real-life contract for a client. That's not to say that she doesn't know contracts better than the rest of us ever will. However, there is, as you know, more than a little element of human interaction that goes into the contract process. It's iterative, and I really don't know how one can claim to be, such an expert in the field if he or she has never actually, sort of gone through a real life contract with a real life person or client.
Well, and also I was on the other side when I was practicing because I was a litigator, and we basically got the stuff where the contract wasn't clear, wasn't,
right.
Basically, all those things that people think, oh, it'll never matter if I put this comma or don't put this comma. It's like, oh no, we had whole lawsuits over that comma.
Exactly.
So yeah,
I think
you would hope for some basic level of, or the thing with pleadings, but also like all the discovery stuff. I mean, you show up in a firm or really anywhere you're a litigator anyway, you show up and they're like, all right, can you, draft our discovery responses? And this is supposed to be a basic task. And I mean, I'd never seen interrogatories. I mean, I was like, what are these?
Right. In other words, I think that, whether it's the rules of procedure, what's the point of talking about pleadings if you don't know really what a pleading is, much less how to construct it? These are, sort of elemental building blocks that I think all lawyers should and must have as just one small part of their arsenal of skill sets before they graduate from law school.
Well, it's interesting when we decided to set, my business partner is also a lawyer. Our parents are lawyers, and there's a whole generations. But when we decided to set up a business, both of us kind of looked at each other and were like, do you know how to incorporate? Do you know how to incorporate? What do we need to do here? It turns out it's not that complicated, but it's amazing that you can graduate from law school and have literally no idea what you're supposed to do. It turns out you just go to bizfilings.org, they take care of it for you.
Right.
But
well, and that raises an interesting point, which is, again, so many things that you formerly would have had to go to a lawyer or a lawyer for, you can now do online.
Oh, and we did it originally, we're both risk-averse lawyers on some level. We're like, oh no, we should have a lawyer draft this, like make it really official. And so, she reached out to someone who came back with a quote that was literally 10x what it was going to cost us to do this online. And also what they sent us was literally a mimeographed form to fill in our details. And we're like, why would we pay you for this?
Well, Allison, I'm a big fan of LegalZoom. And although many people, in the corporate world, lift their nose up at that, I can tell you that for many basic functions, they are really excellent. And I've been a client of LegalZoom, and I can tell you, and I also know the company quite well, this is not necessarily, a commercial for LegalZoom, but I will tell you that it's kind of emblematic of what's going on, that there are different levels of touch point that are required for legal services. Sometimes, self-help is enough. You get a document, from LegalZoom, and it's good enough. Sometimes you have some questions on the document, and LegalZoom, will basically allow you to talk to one of their panel lawyers, for a set price that is a fraction of what it would be, for a law firm. That's another thing. And then sometimes you just plain need a lawyer.
Right.
And they can refer to you. The point is that whether it's in retail law, as LegalZoom operates in, or corporate law, which you and I spent our, time toiling in, the principles are the same. Different tasks have different values. Different tasks require different levels of lawyer participation, and different tasks can be performed either solely by technology by humans and technology, a kind of a hybrid approach, or solely by humans. The problem is for lawyers that they're learning, and particularly in large firms, is that increasingly clients are not interested in paying lawyers, particularly big firm rates, for anything other than truly differentiated professional judgment of those few things that really require it.
Right, which, I mean, that makes sense. They're incredibly expensive.
It does make sense.
Like, who wants to pay $1,000 an hour if they don't have to?
Yeah, unfortunately for law firms, as you pointed out earlier, they're finding out that increasingly, that is winnowing down, the pool of potential billable hours, particularly, for higher volume, lower value functions like document review, basic legal research, all the stuff that used to, sort of keep scads and scads of younger lawyers busy all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at their business model, you've got some serious issues. So we'll touch on that briefly in a bit, but let's finish running through our list of things that schools are not doing that you think they should be doing. So the next on your list, I'm going to combine these two because I think they're sort of related, is project management and collaboration. So what do you mean by that? Like, do lawyers really need to be managing projects? Like, what is this?
Sure. Well, I think that lawyers would be wise to have project management skills, because if they're not going to be the project managers themselves, they are certainly going to be working with project managers going forward. Project management is really, making sure that the trains run on time and on budget. This is just, sort of business 101. This is the sort of stuff that people in virtually every other business endeavor have been doing, since the dawn of time. But it's relatively new to lawyers.
Right. The idea that you should actually leave a meeting with like action items.
Yeah, things like that.
And a schedule.
Exactly. Or dare we say a budget that is actually adhered to. Deliverables, things like that. So I think that project management, sort of as you say, goes hand in hand with collaboration. I think what you've got now is you've got a legal supply chain. Lawyers are increasingly working with paralegals. They're working with other professionals. Clients now don't want legal opinions. What they want are business solutions, of which legal opinions form a part.
Right.
And so what you're seeing now is more and more lawyers having to develop collaborative skills, again, that they're not presently taught in law schools, not only to deal with other lawyers, but also to deal with all these other people in the legal supply chain. And by the way, just, less lawyers think that this is, absolutely heretical. Just imagine for a minute, you're probably not old enough to remember, but 20 years ago, if you went in for your annual physical, probably 90% of the time would be spent one-on-one with your physician and 10% with a phlebotomist or maybe a nurse. Today, you're only spending a fraction of that time with your physician, right? In the beginning, to maybe, sort of refine certain aspects of the history, and to respond to a couple of questions, and then at the end to synthesize test results, those tests having been conducted by others. Why should law be any different?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, the other thing I think in terms of medical, I mean, if my insurance is from Kaiser, and so if I get blood work done, basically, my doctor enters something in the computer, I go to their lab whenever I feel like it, and then they send me the results online, and I have all of the results to compare to, and you're like, wow, this is so much better. Right.
And I think that law is just slowly beginning to go down that road. Because again, you look at the structures from which the services were delivered. Doctors used to deliver services from doctors' offices.
Right.
And unfortunately, if you had an internist, your internist may not, speak necessarily with your cardiologist and, so on and so forth. Today, there's no reason why those records can't be integrated, which is actually going to benefit your level of service. because you have to, sort of treat the person as a whole person. I think you're seeing the same thing with law. Business people are saying, well, lawyers are only giving me a little piece of, sort of my solution, but I need to be able to put all these pieces together in one place, so that, I'm getting a holistic response to my challenge. It's really no different than medicine in terms of the methodology, the technology, and the process that's being implemented here. So I would urge lawyers, as I do often, to look at the medical profession as a kind of a indicator of where they're going to be going. And again, I'm not drawing a value judgment as to whether medical service is better, worse, or the same as it was many years ago, but I think that it is being leveraged to be able to, sort of better service people more efficiently and better leverage physicians' time. I think that's what clients are increasingly demanding of lawyers.
Right. All right. And finally on your list, you had marketing and getting clients. Speaking of the clients, what are schools dropping the ball on here?
I would say pretty much everything. I don't think, Allison, that I have ever heard mention of, sort of courses in rainmaking at a law school. Maybe law schools don't think that that's their business, but I would argue that lawyers do nothing if they're not in the persuasion business. In the first instance, they have to persuade prospective clients that they are the person for the job. They have to, once they get the engagement, they have to persuade the other side that they are capable and competent. They have to persuade judges if they go to court. They have to persuade juries. They have to persuade the other side again that they are not going to be someone that you'd want to go to court with. And also they have to convince clients that perhaps, it's better to settle, as 98.5% of all cases, as do settle, because, of the various vicissitudes of litigation. All these things require persuasion. And I think that, being able to market yourself to clients is one fundamental aspect of being a lawyer. And it's very important.
Well, it's pretty key because if you don't have clients, you don't have anything to do as a lawyer.
That's exactly right.
So what can law students who are listening to this do if they're like nodding along and they're like, yeah, my school has never mentioned any of these things to me? Are there ways that they can develop these skills on their own, or are they just sort of stuck?
I don't think they're stuck. I think, it's sort of, maybe it's no more efficient than saying to a disgruntled person, who's throwing his or her hands up about their chosen representatives, speak to your congressman, write to your senator, etc. But I think that students should properly be raising these issues with law schools. I hope that your organization uses its bully pulpit to do that. And I think that students can also, sort of teach themselves a little bit. I think that there is some pretty good thought leadership out there, readily available on the internet on these topics. And I think that students have to, take a little bit more of the initiative in terms of, sort of getting this kind of an education, even though lamentably they're paying a lot of money and not getting it at law schools. But it's available, it's out there. I think folks like you promote it, hopefully folks like me promote it. And I think it is changing, but not nearly as rapidly as perhaps some, myself included, would like it to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's almost nothing you can't learn on the internet these days if you're dedicated to learning it. And I guess the flip side of this is if you are a law student who goes out and, learns basic skills, develops your interviewing skills, whether it's in pro bono work or taking classes or whatever, develops some marketing skills, has a nice social media profile, maybe does some blogging, that's actually a way to really stand out at this point.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that lawyers today have tools available that were simply not available in my time, specifically social media that you touched on. You have a potential global audience, whether you're a first-year law student or whether you're someone at my stage of their career. And it's all a question of, having appropriate skills and being able to, again, be able to persuade people, have an interesting point of view. And I think that raises another issue, which is conspicuously absent, at least from my law school experience, and that is EQ, emotional quotient and emotional intelligence. I think that is vitally important. And I would add, Allison, that somewhat, paradoxically, as technology becomes more and more embedded into the delivery of legal systems and legal services and their delivery, I think that emotional skills for lawyers become even more important.
I think that's right.
And I think that this is, again, another topic that perhaps, doctrinally driven traditional legal educators might say, oh, that's soft stuff, that doesn't matter. I beg to differ strenuously.
I think it matters. I mean, I sometimes joke that the best thing I got out of law school was starting therapy. And that was actually the most useful. I talked earlier about having to prep someone for a deposition, and the skills I learned in therapy were very helpful in prepping someone for this actual legal thing. Yep. That you can't just ignore the fact that the person's stressed out and they're like, don't know what's going on, and like, you really have to calm them down. You have to get their confidence. Yep. Like, that's the way that you're going to convince them, okay, you can do this. You're going to be fine. This is not like going to be life destroying. It's very stressful, any sort of thing involved in litigation.
Well, one thing you touched on with your therapy, and again, I don't know that all people are going to, necessarily enlist in therapy,
but they should.
But they should. I think that it's fair to say that historically, law schools have sort of taken a very cookie cutter approach to, teaching the doctrinal courses. And, convincing everybody that there is one prototype for a lawyer. I don't think that could be farther from the truth. I think that each of us is a human being first and a lawyer a very distant second. And I think that part of being a successful lawyer is, sort of being able to master your craft and being able to inject your unique personality and skill sets into that craft. I think that's what makes a truly good lawyer. So what might make you a particularly effective lawyer and the skill sets that you have and the personality that you have may not work for me, and vice versa. Although I would dare say probably there's a considerable amount of overlap. But these are, sort of human elements that I think law schools would do well to maybe team with psychology departments or other. I do believe that there should be more interdisciplinary study, as there is among several law schools, particularly in Europe.
Well, I think the business schools, too, do a lot better job of this sort of soft skills. All right, well, we're totally over time, so I'm just going to ask you one question to finish up, which totally ties into this, actually. Are lawyers really going to be replaced by robots? Like, what are we adding here?
Absolutely not. I think that lawyers are going to have to live with robots. I don't know if you remember the famous Peter Sellers movie about, how I learned to live with a bomb and love it. I think that this generation is going to be how I learned to, coexist with robots and kind of deal with it. I think that, clearly there's a place for both. Clearly, there are going to be certain things that separate humans from humanoids. And I think we go back to those kind of soft skills that we talk about. Maybe robots can be programmed to be empathetic and to engender a deep sense of confidence in them. But I think
that doesn't really work so well for the phone tree where you end up just yelling at the person or yelling at the robot on the phone when you call.
Exactly. I mean, how many
operator?
Yeah, exactly. If I had $1 for every time that I cursed out Siri, I would have recaptured my ClearSpire investment, and that's a lot of dollars. But I think, Allison, that what you're going to see is it's not a zero-sum game. It's not going to be all lawyers. It's not going to be all robots. It's going to be a combination of the two. Exactly, some people may be saying, okay, well, what is that combination? My crystal ball broke last summer, so I can't say.
Well, and it depends a lot on the practice area.
I think it does.
I mean, something like family law is going to be really different than something like patent prosecution.
No question about it. No question about it. And again, I think you raise another good point by raising, that example, and that is that, we talk about lawyers and the delivery of legal services as if it's some sort of a monolithic thing. But, there are all sorts of different practice areas, as you know well, all sorts of different values that clients attach to different matters and indeed to different tasks. These are things which are now, sort of being reassessed, as I think they properly should have been done quite some time ago. There will still be plenty of room for lawyers. Lawyers will be doing new and different things that, you or I can't even describe right here and right now, but they will. And likewise, AI will be taking on an assumed importance. But there's plenty of room for both of them.
Right. I mean, it's not like people are going to run out of problems.
Not at all.
And they're not going to run out of fights. So we're always going to have lawyers doing something.
That is for darn sure.
All right. Well, unfortunately, Mark, we're out of time. This has been really fascinating. How can people find you if they want to find you, want to find Legal Mosaic, hear what you're up to?
Sure. Well, they can either check out my website, which is www.legalmosaic.com, or they can check out my Monday morning Forbes postings, Mark A. Cohen at Forbes, or they can follow me on Twitter at Legal Mosaic, LegalMosaic.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been really thought-provoking, and we really appreciate your time.
It's been a lot of fun, Allison. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on iTunes or your favorite app, because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. You can read Mark's column on Monday and also get a new Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.